Government plans to accelerate Ofsted inspections in schools across England have sparked upset and disbelief among teaching staff. Nick Brooke, the Deputy General Secretary of the National Association of Head Teachers, told The Guardian that this announcement feels tone deaf on top of the pressure that schools are already facing due to COVID and post-lockdown teaching. Well, joining me now to tell me more is Dr. Mary Bousted, General Secretary of the National Education Union. Mary, what exactly does this announcement mean? How soon can schools now expect to be inspected?
Well, schools are inspected on a cycle, but what this means is that the period of inspection has been shortened so that Ofsted is trying to fit in more inspections more quickly up to 2025. So that's what's going to happen. What that means for schools is unclear, but it does mean that there will be more apprehension in the system that the inspection is going to come along sooner rather than later.
Do you think this is the sort of thing that should be, well, I mean, I know you don't think it's the sort of thing that should be a priority at the moment, because you've said, I think, that under these new plans show that government ministers have no understanding of the exhaustion and stress felt by teachers and leaders. So what have you been hearing from teaching staff after this announcement? What do you think about it? I mean, I just was absolutely baffled.
Well, I think what I've been hearing from teachers and from school leaders is that all the words that the government ministers have said about thanking the profession for all that they did during COVID, where they were teaching vulnerable children and key worker children in school, without any preparation, switching to online learning or remote learning, using their own equipment in their homes to try and teach children, and then coming back to school and dealing with the COVID regulations and restrictions in school and trying to get their pupils to start to recover from the lost learning during the pandemic. That means that teachers have been working 50, 60, 70-hour weeks, teachers and leaders, to do that. The teachers and the education profession has the greatest incidence of long COVID of any other profession, because they're working in crowded schools, often in unventilated classrooms, and particularly in secondary schools with children and young people who have the highest infection rates of any other age group. And whilst secondary school children generally don't get COVID badly, they can transmit it. So they are seeing now their colleagues going off, becoming infected with COVID, and they are also now having to do full-time teaching and remote learning as well, because each week thousands of young people are off school because they have either got COVID or they have been a very close contact. So these are just not normal times. And the idea that the government would wish to add inspection on top of the pressures and stresses that teachers and leaders and support staff are already facing, just keeping the show on the road, it seems to me to be outrageous.
Ofsted, as I understand it, have received £24 million in extra funding for this. And Education Secretary Nadeem Zahawi said that these inspections would be a great way of providing parents with an up-to-date picture. Are there any positives at all to take from the situation? I suppose, parents might be eager to see how schools have operated through the pandemic and whether they're still operating as well as they were before it. I'm clutching at straws here, perhaps.
Yeah. And Mariella, if we had an inspectorate, if Ofsted were respected by teachers and leaders, and if it did a good job, and if its inspections were of good enough quality, then that would be an argument that you could make quite happily. Other inspectorates don't inspire the fear and loathing that Ofsted inspires. But the facts of the matter are this. Ofsted's been in existence for 30 years. It has never published any evidence which shows that its inspections are of good enough quality, either that they come to the right grades or that inspectors are inspecting the right things. And Ofsted has changed its inspection framework 5 times in the last 10 years. That just shows you how dysfunctional an inspectorate it is. And yet, the prospect of an imminent inspection doubles the workload for teachers and leaders who are already working the most unpaid overtime of any profession. And it's a direct cause of up to 40% of teachers leaving the profession within 10 years. All the surveys of teachers who leave, the key reason that they leave, the top reason, is that the pressure of a toxic accountability system, which is driven by Ofsted. So the inspectorate means that our schools are deprived of teachers, deprived of more experienced teachers, because you get to about 9 years and then up to 40% of teachers say, I can't stand this anymore. And that directly impacts on the quality of education that schools can provide, because if you don't have enough teachers or leaders, you can't provide good education quality. So this is an inspectorate whose own quality is under question, absolutely in question, and whose effects are really, really bad on our education system. And the idea that they need to come in more often and more quickly during the pandemic. They shouldn't be inspecting at all in this pandemic. What they should be doing is going into schools if there are safeguarding concerns, and then they should be doing survey inspections where they can get evidence that they can share with schools and teachers and leaders about what's working well and what needs to improve. But the idea that, you're going to get good information about individual schools from this failing inspectorate is, I think, one for the birds.
Dr. Mary Bousted, thank you very much for joining us.